Hey, everybody, we have a great show for you today. Once again, I get to interview James, and we're taking the question that we used last week and we're turning it around a little bit and focusing on agents and what's the best fit for you, a 1099 or a W 2.
Yeah, and we really dive in a lot of detail about compensation, what type of agreements you should look for, what type of compensation should you look for. We even talk about scaling and hiring.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoyed it, Patty. Thank you for interviewing me. I enjoyed it. This was kind of back by popular demand because I know both of us got so many questions after last week from the agents that are like, okay, you talked about the ISO,
What about us?
What about us? And
Yeah.
And then Patty, tell us about the news from the Insiders Report.
We have some good economic news. I think everybody's going to be, find it very interesting and very encouraging.
Awesome. And let me just say this too, for those of you that listen to our podcast and get value from it, if you haven't checked out our podcast sponsor yet, Patty and I could not be more excited that NMI is now the official sponsor of the Merchant Sales Podcast. Definitely go to ccsalespro.com/NMI. It would really mean a lot to me personally. I've told NMI how engaged our audience is. They're already seeing that, but I would love for you to just check it out. Look at what they have to offer. ccsalespro.com/NMI.
So, James, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Patty Murphy here, and I'm with my good friend James Shepard. Last week we did my first interview with James in quite some time.
Yes.
Since we always interview other people together.
Right.
And it was a really fun interview regarding, whether ISOs should be hiring 1099s or W-2s.
Right.
And, I thought maybe it'd be a great idea this week to sort of turn that around and direct a series of questions to James regarding agents, whether or not you want to be a 1099 or a W-2. And James, I wanted to start off with your story because, a lot of people know that you've been really big into training and you're, an entrepreneur, you've done all kinds of software development, et cetera. But, everybody also knows that at one point you did sell. And
yes, I still do actually.
Yeah, and you still do. But, when you got into the merchant services business, can you give everybody a little thumbnail in terms of,
sure.
What brought you into the business? And then I want to kind of go into some of these other questions, if you don't mind, just to give everybody.
It's such a great question. I'm glad you asked it. In thinking about it, it's like, I really haven't shared the story very much, lately, at least. And, when I get into the industry, this is going back about 13 years ago. So you have to understand my background. Before that, I was selling lawn care services for True Green, Chem Lawn, which, associated with Service Master and all of that. And I had become a regional sales trainer and a branch sales manager, marketing manager for them. So I had like a $6-7 million a year, branch that I was doing the marketing for and doing the sales training, had like 30 sales reps. So I was very much into training salespeople. That was my passion, was like helping salespeople, to sell better and all that. Well, then what happened was my wife and I moved out to Pennsylvania. This is where her family grew up. I came here to visit. I'm like, oh, this is great. I want to move to Pennsylvania. It's a little slower pace. At that time, I was driving like an hour and a half one way to work on the north side of Chicago, and working 80 hours a week. And I'm like, I don't know about this. So I moved out here. And long story short, I was basically looking for a real career. And I thought, while I'm looking for that, maybe I'll do this thing called selling credit card processing.
I've heard that story before.
Yeah. So as everybody knows, as soon as you put your resume on, careerbuildermonster.com, whatever, at that time, those are the big ones. You get inundated with credit card processing recruiters. Right. And so that's what happened to me. And there's a company that I will remain nameless here. Not a very reputable company that brought me into the business. They were very aggressive on recruiting, very aggressive on selling like really high leases on garbage terminals to unsuspecting merchants. One of the things I always crack up about is the first terminal that I ever sold, the Hypercom T4210. What they did was they actually took a sticker called the Quantum 2000. And they stuck this sticker on the bottom of the terminal. So that nobody would know it was a Hypercom and look up how much it cost. You couldn't find anything about the Quantum 2000 online. Because they were leasing it for $99 to $159 a month for 60 months.
Oh my.
and it
Oh
was worth
wow.
like 150
Like
bucks.
$150
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how I get into the industry. So I literally had a 1 day, not even a day. It was like a 3 hour webinar was my training event, a 3 hour event. And that was almost entirely about the terminal and going through, they gave us this, I will say they did a really good job of giving me a nice presentation book, glossy, showed everything, but again, mostly about the terminal. And I was going out there explaining to people how this terminal was going to, really help them. And we were going to save them a fortune on their credit card processing. And so then this was a company that generated leads. So they gave me like 3 appointment scheduled leads a day. And I would go out and I would visit these leads, and then I would go to businesses nearby. I should also mention with this company, my initial experience, I had a sales manager who, when I went into the business, I had to call this guy before I left the appointment, okay, in front of the merchant. So if they said no to me, I would have to call this guy and say, hey, I'm here with Susan. I just talked to her about the Quantum 2000, and she's not interested. And then he'd be like, okay, can I put me on the phone with her? And I'd say, hey, my manager wants to talk to you just to confirm that, I did come here to the appointment and did my job,
Right.
And then he would then try to sell this person as well.
Oh,
right?
wow.
On the phone while I'm standing there. It's super embarrassing.
Yeah.
So that was how I got into the industry. What happened for me was, and kind of where it goes into this whole 1099 W-2, which conversation we'll have today, that was 1099. I was treated like a W-2, but it was 1099. And what happened was I realized within a very short period of time, just a matter of a couple months at most, I think maybe not even that long, but it was very quick. I realized, wait a second, because what happened was that sticker peeled off one day. And I'm like, what's a Hypercom T4210, So I looked it up and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm selling these for like $6,000 because it's like 99 times 60. And I thought, and what offended me as much as that, as what I was doing to the merchant offended me just as much. When I did that, I was getting $500 in commission. So I'm like, wait a second here. Somebody's making, $5,800. How am I only getting $500 here? That's not right. So that offended me, as a capitalist, that offended me almost as much as what was happening to the merchants. So I then took a step back, started looking for another processing company. At that point, I was in a good prospecting habit, which I'll talk more about. And I found a good company that everybody would know on here on the podcast, one of the leaders. And so then I moved over to selling for them, and then did that for about 8 months or so. So, I was in the business for almost a year. And then I started doing the videos, and the rest I think everybody knows of, getting the training out there.
Wow. So it was only a year in.
Yeah, not even, I don't even think it was a year. I think it was maybe 7 or 8 months. And, and a big rationale for that for me was my experience of this 3-hour training. And then I ended up having to take this deep dive myself to figure everything out because nobody trained me about anything. And I thought, if they're aggressively recruiting and there's all these companies bringing all these agents in, maybe somebody should offer some training to these people because they're probably feeling stupid like I am and they want to find something. So yeah, so the rest is history, but that's how I got in.
So just to back up a second, so you were a 1099 at that point
the
when you
entire
went
time.
to the first
I've
company.
always been
a 1099.
Yes.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, did you think that was advantageous, or was it the employer that thought that was advantageous?
Well, it was definitely advantageous for the process for the ISO, right?
Right.
However, again, my initial experience wasn't all bad. In fact, I actually owe my success, I think, to the way that company operated and the fact that they treated me like an employee. Because again, like a lot of people, when I get into this industry, I was very skeptical, and I was like, again, I was like, literally, I was interviewing at places to go be a regional marketing manager at, companies.
XYZ company. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I was looking for a real job. I really, I was like, I'm not, this is straight commission. This is ridiculous. Right.
Right.
But because they had me going to these appointments, because I had the sales manager, I had a daily sales meeting, like we had this structure, it did force me to actually give it a go. And when I did, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, this is pretty cool.
This has opportunity.
Yeah. I'm like, I can sell this. Now I got to get with a company that's going to pay me more than, $10 per mid residual after 200 accounts, which I'll talk about later. But, I'm like, okay, there's something here and there's money to be made. And then at that point, once the motivation was there and I understood what it was, the confidence built up a little bit. Then I went to an opportunity where I didn't need that kind of structure and I was able to be really successful with it.
Right. So, that's a really good introduction to what I wanted to ask you. In terms of, okay, so let's say you're an agent,
Right.
and you start getting some sales in,
Yeah.
right? You start getting wet,
Yeah.
getting your feet wet.
Sure.
What point do you evaluate your relationship with the processor, and what are some of the considerations?
Sure. So I think what's really important here is maybe really even backing up a little bit, because the idea is from day one of the most important things you have to understand about yourself when you get into this business is, are you looking for a career, a job, or are you looking to start a business?
Sure.
And unlike a lot of people on social media and things like that, I actually don't have a general preference there. I really, really don't. Um, there are salespeople who really do want that structure, and even at different points in their life. You know what I mean? When
hmm
I started out, I needed to be a W-2 employee. I really did, because I wasn't totally sold on the business, and I really needed somebody to kind of give me that accountability and structure. And again, I was a 1099 legally, but
Right.
I was a W-2, in a court of law. I mean, I was told when I needed to go places.
Where I needed
I
to
was given
go.
resources that I had to present. I was
Right.
being
Right.
controlled by the company, and that was a good thing for me. And so I think the first question is, what are you looking for? And again, that can change. For
hmm
me, once I had, I think I sold maybe 30, 40 accounts in my first couple of months with them. I mean, I sold a lot. I'm good at sales. That's always been something I didn't have a problem with. So I was good at sales, but once I got to a point and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I know what I'm doing. Then all of a sudden it switched for me. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, this is a job really, but I could actually start a business with this.
hmm
But for a lot of people, they realize, hey, I want to make a lot of sales. So I think, they realize they need the structure and the accountability to make the sales. So
hmm
the question at the beginning is very simple. And that is, what is your best shot at getting your first 30 accounts under your belt?
Right. Right.
If that's W-2, go W-2. If it's 1099, go 1099. But what is your best shot at getting those initial sales? Who's going to train you? Who's going to support you? Who's going to show you the ropes and give you the coaching and the mentoring? So that is the more important part when you're getting those first 30 accounts, because what a lot of agents don't realize in our industry is, getting the first, 10, especially, and really even the first 30, just getting those sales is the only thing that matters in this business. I mean, it's just so
Right.
difficult, and you need a lot of help to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what about, if we can just digress for a second? I don't think
Sure.
it's a big digression, but what about agreements? Because, I mean,
Yeah.
this is all dependent on the agreement you have with the processor, right? And I
Yes.
mean, they're all over the place, and it would seem
Yes.
that to me that you need to be really careful about what you're
Yep.
agreeing to, what
Yeah.
you're signing on that dotted line about.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Patty. That's a great question, because I think even from the beginning, there are two things that are crucial when you're looking into agreements in our industry. Now, I should definitely
hmm
preface this by saying neither of us are attorneys. This is not legal advice. This is our opinion,
No,
right?
but just experience.
Yeah, experience. So, two things I always tell agents when they get into the business that they're new, whether it's W-2 or 1099, doesn't matter. There's two things. Okay. Number one, you cannot be locked into exclusivity. Okay. You
Yes,
cannot be locked
yes.
into exclusivity. That is just,
It's a death knell.
it is. So
Yeah.
now, there's definitely an argument to be made that it's not enforceable anyway. That you'd be able to switch. But the idea is, again, like what happened with me. I got in with a company and turned out they were kind of a scam. I mean, they literally have been shut down by the Attorney General of the state of Texas. So,
Oh.
they were a bad company. I didn't realize that until a little bit in. Once I realized, I switched to a good company. But I mean, you don't know what you're getting into for sure. You can
hmm
easily make a mistake. Don't get yourself locked in. That's number one.
hmm
And number two is, you need to make sure that at some reasonable point you own your residual income,
Yes. Yes.
right? No matter
Right.
what, even if you leave the company. And so I'll tell you how I came up with some pretty good questions, even way back then after I got burned. I was like, okay, wait a minute. I sold all these accounts and I got no residual, and I was, what did I do wrong? So I started figuring out that when I talked to a processing company, I would always ask them some questions. I would say, number one, if I don't like your company after a month and I want to go sell for somebody else, am I going to be able to do that?
hmm
Right. in the same
Right.
industry, and I would look, where in the agreement does it say that I can do that? That's the important thing. Not your word that I can do that. I want to see it in the agreement.
I want it in writing. Right.
And then secondly, as far as the residuals, I would just say a question. I would say, look, let's say I sell 20 accounts for you guys, and then God forbid I get in a car wreck and I'm not able to sell for 12 months, maybe never again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where in the contract does it state that I'm still going to get paid on those accounts?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, having said all that, I do believe it is reasonable for a company that's going to give you support and training to have what we call breakage, or to have a vested number, where the idea is, hey, if your residuals are less than $200, $300 a month, we're not going to pay you, right? Like if you leave the business and your residuals are really, you sold 5, 6 accounts, we're not going to pay you. And, if you're worried about that, you really shouldn't even be in the business in the first place. So I think that's totally reasonable, but at some reasonable point, it should be like, okay, but if my residuals are over 300, no matter how many sales I make, no matter what I do, I get to keep my residual, right? And it's like, yeah. So even if you're W-2, you should still make sure that that's in your contract. And that's not that difficult. They can very easily convert that income to 1099 income. So the idea would be,
that was going to be my next question. Yeah. Can you convert it from W-2 to 1099?
Absolutely. There are a lot of companies now that do this. They bring people in as W-2, but they say, look, we're going to pay you as a W-2 employee, but if at any point we part ways, and as long as you've reached X number of accounts or residual or whatever, then we're going to continue paying your residual as a 1099 for the life of those accounts.
Okay.
Right. So just make sure you're not exclusive. Make sure that you have lifetime vested residuals. Those are the only two things that matter. Even if your residual percentage is not that great, even if the comp isn't that good, you're getting those first 30 accounts under your belt. And, then I think, Patty, you'd ask me a question about, once we get to some point, right? As far as
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you get to that point, okay. So once you have the, first few under your belt,
right,
you're going to, you got to kind of reassess the relationship.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So let's say then you get maybe a couple hundred accounts under your belt. You're much more experienced. You're feeling a lot more confident about what you're doing.
Right.
You like the processor you're working with.
Yeah.
What should you be expecting in terms of compensation?
Yeah, such a good question. And I really haven't answered this publicly in quite a long time. So I'm going to give some actual information today about,
some
residual splits and
Right.
So let's first of all make really clear this distinction. And this is something that agents just really struggle to understand in our industry. You understand you have a residual split. So let's talk about that for just a second. For those that are really, really new, let's do the 30-second spiel. Okay.
Yep. Excellent.
Like any business, we have revenue and expenses. Our revenue minus our expenses equals our profit. Like any other business, whether it's a bicycle shop, a hot dog stand. In our business, our revenue is the fees that merchants pay to us to process credit card payments.
Right.
The expenses, or the cost, is going to be things like interchange fees, card brand fees, even Schedule A costs. So your processor is going to have some costs that they charge
costs,
you.
Sure.
Right. So when you put all that together, let's use some just really generic kind of average numbers. So let's say we have a pizza shop and they're doing $10,000 a month in volume. Just to make the math easy, it's a small place. Okay. So they do $10,000 a month. And let's say that we're charging them flat rate 3%. So they're paying $300 to process $10,000 worth of transactions. All right.
Okay.
We can generally assume that between the interchange and the card brand fees, there's going to be about a 2% on average, 2 to 2.2% cost.
Right.
Okay. Then we're going to have some other miscellaneous fees from the Schedule A costs, et cetera. But let's just call it 2.2%. So 10,000 times 3% is $300. That's what they're paying in fees. So if they get a credit card processing statement, the merchant, that pizza shop owner, you look at it, it says, hey, we processed $10,000 worth of transactions. We deposited that $10,000 into your bank account. You're going to pay us $300 because you're at 3% flat rate.
Mm-hmm.
Then as the agent, you should be getting a residual report. And that report will say, hey, we collected $300 from the merchant. We had, 2%, interchange cost, 0.2% or 20 basis points of card brand fees and Schedule A costs. So that we take that's $220. So we take that away. That left us with $80 of what our industry calls margin or gross margin. Okay. So you generated $80 in gross margin. So now the question is two things when it comes to compensation. Number one, how much did you get paid when you made that sale, if anything.
Okay.
And number two, what percentage of that $80 are you getting?
Right.
So there's our first trade-off. And this is a super important trade-off that agents do not understand. Listen, if you don't have money in the bank, you need upfront compensation.
Right.
Because not only do you have to keep the lights on, pay the mortgage, all of that, but in addition to that, there are going to be times where getting an account is going to cost you money. They may need a special point of sale system. They may need whatever, and they may want you to split the cost of their early termination fee or whatever. So we got to look at all of the upfront loaded compensation, and also remember that cash is not the only way that a processor can pay you an upfront bonus. There's also free equipment.
Well, that's what I was going to, yeah, exactly. Right. I mean,
right?
if the processor gives you equipment to give to them, to give to the merchant, that no longer becomes a cost. It becomes part of your, part of your all in. Well, it does become a cost, but I mean, it's
right. It's part of your compensation in a way. And of course, now if they're giving it to the merchant, quote unquote, free, but charging them a $20 rental fee, well, that's different. But I'm talking about it's actually just costing them money out the door to get this equipment placed. They're doing that because they're trying to help you make the sale. So again, always remember as an agent, you have to be able to make the sale to make any money. So it's great that you have a, 97% split, Mr. Experienced rep. But the thing is your processor does nothing for you. They provide no equipment, no support. They never pick the phone up when the merchant calls, and you can't close any deals. And when you do, they cancel. So I don't care about your 90% split. That's stupid.
That used to crack me up because we'd see all those ads in the green sheet,
Yes.
Give you a 90% split, and I used to think of what?
right. That too. So a lot of companies they're gonna inflate their Schedule A cost and things of that nature. So what you have to understand is the first trade-off is the upfront versus the residual. Now again, if you have $100,000 in the bank, or you're financially well off and you're in a position to start your business where you can afford to buy equipment, where you can afford to hire support people, all of these things, then absolutely maximize.
There aren't a lot of people like that though, right?
No.
I mean,
right. Then you want to maximize your residual, but if not, you got to look at the trade-offs. But there's another trade-off, Patty, that I actually think is even more important than the upfront versus the residual. There's another residual trade-off, and that is processor support and resources versus residual.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Because if you're not getting the support, the residuals are just going to dwindle away.
Well, not only that, but yeah, you may not even make the sale. There are so many agents that will reach out to me and say, James, I have a 85% split with this company, but they don't pick the phone up when I call. I don't really understand the terminal options. I lost the sale last week because they couldn't integrate with the point of sale system that I needed, blah, 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 blah. And when I talk to them on the phone, in 30 seconds, I'm able to tell them what they needed to do to get that deal. Right. But the processing company, what you have to understand is if they're giving you, I'm not saying that these companies are bad. If they're giving you, 85% or something, they're not bad. The thing is, they're just positioned to service somebody else. Right. They're positioned to service larger organizations that are selling processing that don't need their help, that don't need their support, that don't need anything really. Right. And so understand there's this trade-off of support versus residual income. And you may have to give up some portion of your residual income to offset things like support, even things like taking on risk, which I never recommend an individual agent do ever, even a small ISO for that matter. I never recommend you take on risk. So there's these things that are trade-offs, Patty. And I think, for the agent that's got, 100, 200 accounts, when you're starting to build a serious book, you want to be getting a reasonable residual split at that point. What's industry average? I would say right now, industry average probably is around, if you're getting a couple $100 or $200 to $300, maybe $400 in upfront value of some kind, free terminal, money upfront, whatever, true up, revenue. You're probably industry average right now is probably a 50% split, right? 50% residual split. That's a true residual split, meaning you have a reasonable Schedule A cost. And then if you're not getting any upfront, anything, no free terminals, any of that, industry average is probably in that 70 to 80% range. Now again, having said that, I'm giving this information out. And one thing that concerns me is some of our listeners are like, well, I'm only getting 60%. I'm getting ripped off. Hold on a minute. Is your company providing you with a culture and some accountability and some structure and some support
Right.
that is helping you to make more sales? If so, you're getting a fantastic residual split, right? Because 60% of 200 deals a year is a lot better than 80% on 40 deals a year.
Right.
The game is about getting a lot of sales. It's not, and getting a processor that knows how to help you keep those sales so they keep getting you residual. So 60% on an account that cancels after 6 months is nothing compared, that's terrible, right? I'd rather have 50% on an account that stayed with me for 5 years.
Of course.
So now, lifetime value. So there's some other considerations I would say there.
So, but when you're at that point, when you're at the 200, 300, 400, you're
right.
Really building your book, getting pretty big. I want to return to the original question though. At that point, should you be a W-2 or should you be a 1099?
Yeah,
I mean, because it's a W-2, you're going to be getting a smaller residual for obvious reasons, right?
Well, maybe,
and if you're doing that good.
Yeah,
okay.
maybe not. So what I would say is, again, I really sincerely believe this depends on the person. And I know this episode, I'm already envisioning the comments I'm going to get from people saying, James, this is stupid. You should always be 1099. I already got some of those from the last episode, but I just disagree. I really do. And I'll tell you why, because there are agents in this industry, and the fact that I'm talking to people that are going to comment now. The fact that you, Mr. Commenter, don't know any of them doesn't mean they don't exist. It means they run in different circles than you.
Exactly.
There are agents right now in this industry who are W-2, who get paid a salary plus massive bonuses, who have a lifetime vested residual income, who are W-2.
Wow. Okay.
Lots of them, actually. There are probably more. I don't know. There's probably about an even number, in my opinion, probably an even number of 6-figure agents that are W-2 as 6-figure agents that are 1099.
Okay.
Pretty close.
That's news to me. I did not realize it was that close.
Yeah. And the reason is because, frankly, there are some monster companies in our industry that are all W-2 and that treat their agents very well. And what you understand is those W-2 opportunities, generally speaking, they are more front end heavy. So I'll give you an example. Several of these W-2 companies do something similar where they do kind of like a residual buyout up front. So we talked about the upfront versus the residual, that trade-off.
Right.
Well, they may buy, 12 months of margin as the upfront bonus or something crazy. And so, people are getting, X percentage of the total gross margin for 12 months upfront. So they'll bring a deal on board and they may get $2,000, $3,000 for that sale. And then they're only getting maybe 10, 15, 20% long-term residual income.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. That's what I was accustomed to seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you'll have that, but what's funny about that is it's like, why is one of these options good and one of these bad? I mean, getting 3,000, upfront on an account, if it equates to a 30x buyout or whatever.
Well, that's exactly. Yeah.
Who cares? Like it's the money is the money. So again,
the money's there in the bank right now. So
and again, you may be at a point where you're saying what you want to do is you want to build lifetime vested residuals, and your goal is to maximize your recurring income, and you're willing to sacrifice your short-term cash flow in service of that objective. If that's you, become a 1099, right? Find a good processing company that's going to give you the support that you need to be successful, and then get that residual and start building it up. But you might say, you know what? I'm more motivated when I'm making $200,000 a year consistently, and I don't want to give that up ever. And I think it'd be great if I could do that while also building 15, 20%, in the background. Great. Then go make sales and make $2,000 every time you make a sale as a W-2. Right. And build and keep making a fortune while building your residual. There's nothing inherently wrong with that model. It's just different. And I think the key is, again, going back to what I said earlier, is, are you looking for a job or are you looking to start a business? One of my pet peeves, Patty, is people that make it seem like the business option is the one that's good and the employee, the job, the evil job. Why?
Yeah. I mean,
what makes you happy? What makes you successful? What makes you productive? For many, many, many people I know. Now, you put me in a W-2 job right now, I will get fired within like a week. Like,
You and me both.
I am not, I don't even know how to do it anymore. I really don't. I know how to hire people. I don't know how to work for people. I just don't, that's not my makeup. I'm an entrepreneur, have been my entire life. And so whenever I had a job, I was always bucking against everything, and the HR always hated me. And it was like, what is up with this guy? All he wants to do is work. And, so I had these problems.
I had the same problem. Yeah.
But again, I fully recognize that that's totally different for other people. And so there's a different fit, and that, different people need different things.
Yeah. I had my niece was staying with me earlier this week, and she pulls out her PC, and she's a traveling nurse, and she's doing some. She's like, "Aunt Patty, I don't get how you can work from home all the time. I would be like so unproductive."
See, I can't do that either. That's so interesting, right? Like, if I work from now, I got 4 little kids there. But even before that, I've never been great at working from home. I like to have an office to come to.
Yeah. And with her, I have an office with a door that shuts that but I was like so unhappy when I was in an office.
Right.
And I spent so much time jumping through the corporate hoops.
Yes.
And then, after 5, I could get my work done.
Right.
Which was like, no, that's just not for me. It's been so long that if they put me in office today, like you, I'd be fired in a week.
Yeah, I would get the insubordination thing pretty quick, I think, at this
really,
point.
In fact, I had my last employer told me I didn't play well with others.
But what's funny about that too, I think it's easy as well for people to get the idea that success in those 2 realms requires totally different things. And there are subtle differences, but I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I was the youngest marketing, branch marketing manager in the company. I had 30 employees. Like, that worked for me because I worked so hard. They were willing to put up with me because my results were so
you worked
good.
so hard and you got such great results. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, again, now it's definitely not the right fit for the stage of life I'm in, but I think everybody's a little different there.
Yeah. Well, because you mentioned, you allude to your stage of life now, and we all know that you have, your own company and lots of folks working for you. Let's put it into the perspective of the agent,
Right.
And, once they're ready to scale, they're going great guns. They have a great portfolio, what should be their hiring priority? Should they, should they go out and get more agents to work for them? Maybe they should go get an assistant that does their scheduling for them. Maybe they need a programmer. What should be some of the priorities there if you're trying to scale up and become, a sub ISO or even an ISO?
I love this question. It's such a great question. And I can tell you from talking to the most successful people in our industry for the last, 12 years, you've got to scale yourself. You have to have the discipline and the humility to scale yourself before you try to scale others. And so what I mean by that is your hiring priority should be maximizing your strengths, not the things that you want to do, the things that you do best.
Right.
Let me say that again. Hire people so that you can maximize the things you do best, not so that you can do the things you want to do.
So if you're a really good salesperson and that's what you do best,
right?
You should be out there selling and having people do the other stuff that you're not so happy with. On the other hand, if you're a really good manager, maybe you should be hiring agents and training them and getting them out on the street and building your portfolio that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. With one caveat there, going down that path of, I think there's a lot of people that use that as a little bit of an excuse to say, oh, I'm a really good manager. I'm such a good manager. I really don't need to sell anymore. Well, hold on a minute. So I would question a little bit the idea that you're not a very good salesperson, but you would be a fantastic sales manager.
Excellent point.
That's a little bit, that's a little bit crazy. So to me, if you think you're going to be a really good sales manager, that means you're probably very good at sales. Maybe you would be an amazing sales manager, but you got to at least be decent at sales, right? So what you want to do is you want to scale yourself first. And let me give you another reason for this. What I see a lot of people do is they bring on 2 or 3 salespeople.
Right.
And these salespeople need like a massive amount of support and help.
Right.
And they're totally on their own. They're trying to help them do everything. They're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. So what I did was I started by hiring an assistant that did my scheduling for me. Okay. Then I hired somebody that did my installations for me. So they would go. So I got a guy that was working part-time at a computer shop, a high school kid who's a senior in high school, and got him to do this and run around because he was just graduated. He's going into college in a couple of years. So I thought I'll work with James for a while. So he went and did my installs for me. I had somebody, then I got somebody do my customer service. My assistant started doing all the paperwork because back then it was all paper, the application.
Right. Sure.
So I had people doing all these things and my assistant did all my scheduling. So when I give you an example of what I'm talking about, scaling yourself, when I walked into a business, when I would leave that business, I would stop. I pulled up my phone. I hit one button on an app I had it set up, and I would send a voice note to Angela. Angela.
Right.
I sent a voice note to Angela, who was my assistant even back then, and she took care of everything. So I would say, hey, I just talked to Bill at XYZ hardware store here on Plank Road. And Bill said I need to come back Thursday when his partner Susan is here, blah, 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 blah. And I would go to the next one. So she would literally
then put that in your scheduling.
Yep,
exactly.
And now I'm selling 25, 30 deals a month. Okay. Because all I'm doing is selling. I'm really good at it. Well, guess what happened when I hired my first sub agent? Well, Angela helped them with their schedule and their, stuff. My support person helped with their merchants. My installation person installed their terminals. Right. So I was actually pretty happy with that. So I had already built this kind of support infrastructure because I scaled myself. Then I knew that I could scale other people rather than just me blindly hiring people, removing myself from the equation where it's like, well, I can't make any sales at all because I hired 2 people.
Right.
If you can't make any sales because you hired 2 agents, you need to fire those 2 agents and you need to rethink your hiring strategy. You might go from selling 25 a month to 15. I know people, I just had Rich Norton. I'm just thinking of him because I did an event with him recently. He's selling personally 25, 30 accounts a month. And I think right now he has like 60 active agents, wow. You have to have a support infrastructure in order to do these things. You don't just go all by yourself and, well, here we go. Let's see what happens. Like, you don't do everything for the agents. What you do for the agents is the thing that only you can do, which is show them how to sell. You shouldn't be helping them with their paperwork and their accounts. If you're doing that, you need to take a step back and have the humility and have the discipline to scale yourself and to work hard for another 6 months or a year. Hire some core people for $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Hire some core people, pay for them with your own efforts by going out and making a lot more sales than you were making, do it the right way. Then when you bring people on, it's going to be just a lot better for you.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really enlightening, James. A lot of really good advice here. Thanks. I have one. I know we've been talking for a while, but I do have one more question I want to hit you with, and that's something that's come up a lot from me over the years. Is you're building up a business. You go from being an agent to maybe being a sub ISO.
Sure.
Maybe you want to even make the next step. At what point should you be considering registering with the brands?
Yeah, such a great question. I get it asked all the time as well. And what I tell people today is, you need to have a good reason to register your brand. There are only 2. Okay. If you're thinking of registering your brand for anything other than these 2 reasons, don't do it. Okay, there's only 2. Number 1 is to negotiate better, more flexible compensation. Okay. Some companies will give you a better deal because you're a registered brand. They may, very hard to find this today, but they may give you even portability at some point. If you stay with us for 5 years, you can take your account somewhere else, that kind of thing. So there's some flexibility options and some things available to the registered brand where you're taken a little bit more seriously. But I have to tell you, at the end of the day, it's going to be stick count. So it's ultimately going to be how many sales you make. You might be able to negotiate something slightly better as a registered brand, but not much. So the main reason is because you want to have your brand on the credit card processing statement that the merchant receives.
Yeah.
That is literally the only reason in my mind, because again, you can have your own website. It just has to, comply with certain compliance things and stuff. But I mean, you can have your own brand. You can put your brand on your business cards. You can do all of that anyway. So at the end of the day, is your logo going to be on the merchant agreement and is it going to be on the statement? Is it hampering your marketing efforts because you're running into compliance issues of like, well, we can't call ourselves a credit card processor, So in my opinion, you got to be pretty large for those things to justify the investment, which is in the tens of thousands after you pay.
It's a huge investment. Yeah, exactly.
And the opportunity cost. I mean, for 6 months, you're going to be spending a chunk of every day for 6 months getting yourself registered that you could be spending growing your business. So it's a really big deal. There's a lot of companies now that have good white label programs where you can literally get your brand on the statements and all that within a week or two, without all of that cost and expense. There's some trade-offs, but there's some good white label programs now. So I think the idea of the full registration, I definitely think that the bar for that has risen in terms of how large you need to be for that to make any sense. But it's still a viable option. You know, at some point, I'd be glad to discuss that with anybody if you're looking at your specific situation. But you know, there's good white label programs out there that I think have made it where it's like, do you really want to register? You better be pretty large. You better have a good team in place to do that.
Yeah, I've seen some of those. In fact, I was at MWAA and ran into a couple of those, and you know, it was like, wow, this is a very viable option if I was, you know, a good size sub ISO. So
I mean, the big trade-off there for a lot of people is, you know, to do that, that company has to register your brand as a DBA, which kind of means that in some respects they own your brand. So you can't really register your brand through anybody else at that point.
Right.
Now, again, you can negotiate. It's all negotiable, you know, but depending on the ISO, you do have to be a little careful there that you don't get stuck. So that's the only trade-off. But again, that versus taking 6 months off of growing your business to register.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
Well, James, this has been great. This has been really great. I really appreciate you letting me interview you again. And
thanks for doing
I think our listeners and viewers are gonna, you know, get some real good meat from this.
Yeah, well, let me say one last thing. I'll make available, Patty. I do it usually once a year. I send an email out, but I'll make it available right now. If you're looking for the right credit card processing company, you have questions about anything I talked about today, I'll do a free call with you today. Not today, but you know, at some point here. So if you go to ccsalespro.com, there's a link right at the top called Find a Processor. And I have different links there if you're green, if you're experienced, or if you're an ISO owner or exec. And I'd do like a free 15-minute Zoom call. I'd be glad to help you out to answer questions that you have and even make an introduction to a processing company if the conversation warrants that. So.
Oh, that's a great deal. If you're listening again, ccsalespro.com. Up in the right is where it says find a processor.
Right on the top center actually, and it says find a processor. So
find a processor. Check it out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Patty.
Thank you. Well, James, this is where we give a shout out to our sponsor, NMI. You know, one of the things I saw them at MWAA, the Midwest Acquirers Association. A lot of acronyms.
A lot of acronyms here.
Yeah, I get a little slurry on that, but you know, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting was, you know, what they refer to as organizational hierarchy, but it's you know, the idea of being able to choose a platform that provides flexibility to manage and grow your business, you know, sort of like the ISO back office organization.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting. I think a lot of people don't realize what NMI has to offer here because there's a lot of ISOs that actually board all of their merchants or the vast majority through the NMI gateway because they have, you know, they support physical terminals as well and things like that. And so they don't have their own physical devices, but they, you know, they integrate with a lot. And so the idea there is a lot of times you'll have either an ISV or, you know, an ISO that's focused on a particular vertical. And you can just so easily, and I know because we had this, like I'll give you an example. When we had our self-storage software company.
Right, I remember that.
We were helping self-storage companies manage. We integrated with NMI, and it was super easy. Whenever we made a sale, we sent the merchant agreement into the ISO that we were using, and then they would give us back the VAR sheet, and then my team would be able to go in easily into NMI, add them right in there, no problem, set them up. We can set permissions of who manages them. We can see what their processing activity is. We can even go in and impersonate, you know, like kind of like not impersonate, but like log into their account.
Right.
And we can see what they're doing. You know what I mean? So I thought it was, you know, it's a very robust back office to manage, you know, the mids and have all your different users back there and resellers and all that.
And you're not only managing your agents, you're managing your merchants through the same,
absolutely,
through the same platform, which makes it so much easier.
Yeah. So, you know, I wouldn't, you know, it's not a replacement of something like an Iris or anything like that. But the idea is it really is a gateway, but that gateway solution then on the back end, that gateway connects to a lot of different things. and they have such a robust thing in the back office to be able to see all of that in one place. And
Right.
they're really making it better every quarter. They're making improvements. So if I would tell people, if you have not checked out the ISO back office for NMI, please go check it out. Go to ccsalespro.com/N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, NMI. So ccsalespro.com/NMI. Fill out that form and just talk with them. See if there's a good fit. Let them know the types of merchants you're selling, the type of hardware you're placing. They can really help you to make your ISO much more flexible. And as Patti mentioned, give you that really robust back office.
This is the Insider's Report with Patti Murphy.
Well, we have some good good news on the economic front. The U.S. Commerce Department reports that retail sales grew by 0.6% in June, bolstering expectations that the final numbers for Q2 will show strong economic growth.
Great.
Consumer spending was 11.4% on an annualized basis in the first quarter.
So it was up 11.4%?
Up 11.4%.
Nice.
And GDP estimates for this quarter hover around 9%, with a poll of economists conducted by CNBC showing expectations of 7%.
I was going to say 9% is big. Yeah, that's huge.
9% for the quarter, 7% for the year. This is just to put that in perspective. That would be the fastest growth recorded in the U.S. economy since 1984, which, James, I think you were still a toddler then, and I was settling into my first mortgage.
Yeah, I was 1 year old in 1984. So now let me ask you this. That's year over year versus obviously the COVID year.
Yes. Of course, right.
Maybe you've seen data, or are we up from before COVID, or you know what I mean? Like, have you seen?
Yeah, compared to June 2020, we're up 18%. The data I saw, and it's been a couple of weeks since I've seen this data, but year over 2019, it was about 0.2, 0.3.
Got it. Okay, so we've made it back.
We've made it back. We're at pre-COVID or just above pre-COVID levels.
Okay, got it.
Which, considering, we're still dealing with, it's not too shabby at all. And I wanted to give you a sense of some of the sectors, where, that how things, certain sectors performed. Receipts in electronics and appliance stores were up 3.3%.
Okay.
Food and beverage sales were up 0.6%. Online retail sales were up 1.2%, but of course, June was when Amazon had its Prime Day, so that probably had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, sure.
Furniture store sales fell 3.6%. Sporting goods, hobby, musical instruments, and books dropped 1.7%, which I think is because we all kind of went gung-ho into our hobbies when we were at home, right?
Right.
And we're sort of now spending on other things.
Yeah, sure.
And then there was this from the American Consumer Credit Counseling. They do a financial health index. Mm-hmm. It was released this week. It shows consumers are getting more comfortable with buying with credit. According to the data, half of U.S. consumers took out their credit cards to pay for purchases in the last quarter.
Wow.
As opposed to debit cards. Yeah, it's great news for us. The survey also found that 7% of adults are confident that their income security and security and continued employment. That's up from 42% in March. So, positive news.
It seems kind of, wait, say that percentage again. That sounds kind of low.
47%. Well, right now we're dealing with states where the COVID rates are high and the Delta variant and so forth. Wow. I think that's kind of...
Well, still more than half of Americans don't feel confident about, what was it again?
Well, about their income, security, and continued employment.
Oh, good night. Okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, so about half and half.
I mean it's up. What you're looking it's up, which is good, but
I think I did not find their data for a year ago, but I would venture to guess it was way down then.
It was probably 10% or something. Yeah,
like 10 or 20%. Yeah. But I still think overall, we have GDP growing and strong. We have retail sales coming back.
Right.
Credit card usage coming back. I think that's all good news for people listening.
Love it. Yeah, good stuff. Well, hopefully those trends will all continue moving in the right direction. And
that's what we can hope for.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Patti, for the update.
Sure thing.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.